The question is, can you speak to compassion and cultural and language differences? I coach entrepreneurs in a developing nation and sometimes find myself exhausted by trying to find the neutral road for communication. Um, First, I'll say no wonder you're exhausted. We do a lot of work in the humanitarian sector and work with a lot of leaders who are doing significant work in cultures that are not what I would call their home culture, the culture that they were raised in. And each culture has its own set of codes around what is proper and appropriate, how hierarchy is defined, how direct or indirect communication is, the role of gender, all kinds of obvious and not so obvious codes that tell us how should we behave, how should we engage, how do we show care, how do we get people involved, how do we communicate. And it is it is exhausting, I think, for people to try to navigate all of that in a culture that is not their own. And certainly, if we're coaching people to try to do that work, it can be quite challenging. And certainly, if we're coaching people in a culture that's very different from our own, it can also be challenging. So, along the way, we have learned a couple of things. It's not a miracle, but it has helped us. And I think one is when we're working outside a culture that we know well, we need to slow the process down because we need to learn, and we there's a lot of trial and error. The second thing is to find translators, to find people, not so much a language translator as a code translator, to help us understand what requires more time, what's a way of saying things that are more acceptable, how do we share information, what should be shared in writing versus verbally. So there is a deep diagnostic piece that happens in the space. At again, I would say at a biological level, in terms of how our brain works, we are as humans wired to be compassionate, wired to recognize the suffering of others and have a some degree of compulsion to respond to that. It's not, of course, universal for all the suffering we see and for all people, but it is built in, if you will. So I think the space is to understand that there is a human element to this that transcends culture, and to find a level of understanding of what that unique code is, to put that compassion and communication and engagement in play in a way that works for that particular culture. Not easy, yet, yes, exhausting, but satisfying when you get close.